So now we have our final fireside chat, which is going to be very interesting. You've heard about everything that's been going on in Philly for the last year and a little bit about how the current market is shaping up. And now we're going to look ahead at 2025. And when we come back next year, we can look back and see if our predictions happened. So we're really, really happy to welcome Alex Philippidis, the Senior Business Editor from Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News, to moderate a discussion between Ian Anderson, the Senior Director of Research and Analysts from CBRE, and Matt Gardner, who we also heard earlier, the Managing Director of CBRE.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks to everyone taking the time today to attend this fireside chat. It's titled Pennsylvania 2025 Life Sciences Outlook. And of course, thanks to our speakers for joining us today. I'm Alex Philippidis, Senior Business Editor with Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News. A century ago, actually, I'm old enough to remember a comedian, W.C. Fields, because he tried to make a joke of this city when he suggested a tombstone epitaph for himself that he'd rather be in Philadelphia. Today, a growing number of biotech and other life science employers think of being in Philadelphia as anything but funny. They range from pharma giants like Roche to institutions like UPenn and Drexel and Children's Hospital, CHOP. 2 weeks ago, diagnostics developer bioMérieux cut a ribbon to open its new molecular and genomic innovation center at the Navy Yard, where about 50 people are based. And, oh, dear. Now. These and other employers have spent millions creating thousands of jobs within millions of square feet within Greater Philly, from Center City to Collegeville and beyond. Select Greater Philadelphia, the regional business group, counts more than 50,000 life sci jobs in the 11-county region. And I think you heard some higher numbers earlier from the city's Commerce Department. That includes more than 7,000 jobs tallied by the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia in the cell and gene therapy space. And it's a point of pride for the region, given anchors like UPenn, Jefferson Health, the Wistar Institute, and of course Roche-owned Spark Therapeutics. That critical mass helps explain why Greater Philadelphia ranked 6th on Gen's most recent A-list of top 10 U.S. biopharma clusters this past summer. Greater Philadelphia scores highest in patents and is closing the gap in venture capital. In fact, over the last year, a lot of the companies receiving venture financing are cell and gene therapy up-and-comers, like Lattice Bio, which closed in May on $54 million in Series A financing to further develop gene therapy for disorders of the central nervous system. And also in May, Imvax, a Jefferson University spin-out, raised $35 million toward a roughly 100-patient phase 2B trial of its autologous cell therapy, IGV-001, which is now under study in glioblastoma patients. And the region's more challenging areas had been the middle of the pack in NIH funding and lab space, where estimates range from, I've seen as much as 13 million square feet when you count property under construction, to as much as 23.7 million square feet from select Greater Philadelphia. And also, the challenge for this area being the workforces, given the size of larger workforces up in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, let alone Boston and North Carolina. Happy to learn more about by hearing from our speakers today. Matt Gardner, a managing director who had CBRE's advisory life sciences practice in the U.S., and Ian Anderson, senior director of research and analysis with the firm. Ian, Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Sure. First off, let's get started with your own 30,000-foot big picture perspective of Greater Philadelphia's biopharma and life science cluster and beyond.
Oh, good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, man. You're serious?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
You
okay,
start.
Yeah,
You first.
of course. 30,000 foot? Well, I mean, you mentioned so many glowing, attributes to the region, right? It's got a lot going for it. I guess, you mentioned a lot of it. I guess there's a couple things I'd mention. One is I just looked at the employment data for Greater Philadelphia and the city of Philadelphia. I think through some of the challenges in real estate, these things get overlooked. But we have a record amount of people employed in Greater Philadelphia and life sciences. So that's one thing. It continues to grow. And that's also a record for the United States too regarding life sciences employment. So the industry is stable, it is growing, it is in not direct contrast, but it's in contrast to some of these challenges we have in commercial real estate. I think Lauren on the panel before us mentioned record NIH funding. I think that's another thing that might get overlooked from folks in Philadelphia, and I've done a good amount of research on job drivers around different metropolitan areas in the country. Philadelphia's meds, its health services economy it's booming. Now, I haven't looked at some of the granular, like who's exactly doing this. Obviously, it's probably Penn and Temple or Jefferson or some of the health systems, but it's obviously side by side with life sciences helping this. But the medicine establishment, the medicine foundation for Philadelphia it's booming. And so, obviously that's a huge factor that's going to help boost and continues to add some stability to the region's industry. So, when you try and explain the industry, the way it is, what's going on, it's very hard to look at some of the stability of employment, the industry, if you will, some of the growing financial factors, some of the growth in the meds, but then you have to juxtapose it against what's happening in real estate with a little bit too much construction. So it's kind of a hard story to weave there, both sides of that, but hopefully that gives you some perspective from 30,000 feet on what's going on from my perspective.
I think I would like to quibble.
You would?
But only a little.
Okay, good, yeah.
First of all, Nancy, I just want to thank you for putting me in the way of everyone's lunch and then everyone's happy hour. That is just a special place. Thank you. Always appreciate a conversation with Alex, which we've had going on for
almost 20 years.
Almost
since
20 years.
2007 in San Francisco.
Yeah, how about that? Great stuff. Thank you, Alex, as always. Always appreciate this. I actually think, now, Lauren has been on many sides of the table, so she's been around in roles where she's been on the capital side, the developer side, and all those kinds of things as well. Sheer Partners, obviously, I've worked with Sheer Partners since 2002. They've been doing this a long time. That prior panel, is Nelson still here? Great job, Nelson. Are you still here? Fantastic job. Great job.
There he is.
Terrific panel. I think what I still come back to every day when we think about where the industry is that is all patient capital that you heard from. That perspective of very long cycles is a very sharp contrast with the general business cycle. And it is a great reminder for us every day that we're inherently disobedient as a community of stakeholders here. Drug development takes a hell of a long time. Who here has ever completed 3 phases of clinical trials in 12 months? Come on! Let's be serious. It's never going to happen, AI or not. We're in a long development cycle that necessitates a view that goes well beyond a 2-year change in capital markets. And so I think the fact that you've got that patient capital perspective, here's what I'm going to do.
Where's the quibble?
I'm going to take us inside the commodities trading firm of Duke and Duke.
Yeah.
Anyone? Been inside Duke and Duke? You all have. It's a Philadelphia firm. Randolph and Mortimer Duke.
Yeah.
They would say Philadelphia futures remain way up, and here's why.
Yeah.
We are at day 1 of cell and gene therapy in the long sweep of history, and here's why I would argue that. Although we've been obviously doing this here in Philadelphia since the 1990s and had some false starts with gene therapy a little bit, as we've all sort of acknowledged over time, it took us 30 years to figure out how to optimize monoclonal antibodies. We knew what they were, struggled for a lost decade of sunk investments. We had some great accounting sleight of hand in California, for example. We had something called R&D partnerships. If you've been around a long time, you might have invested in some R&D partnerships. It was a great way for companies that no longer exist to take little pools of capital and dedicate them to individual drug programs as opposed to net operating losses and carry forwards. Really interesting mechanisms. Those are all gone. Point being, monoclonals didn't work. Get to the 90s. Monoclonals started to show signs of working. But then we realized there were some side effects happening because we were using non-human antibodies. We were using the wrong model. Then we got to humanized antibodies, and then we got to fully human antibodies. You know how long that took? That took 20 years of refining maps before we actually came into sort of full fruition. Why am I telling you all this? To sort of go back in the Wayback Machine. See, I used it again. It's going to be similar in cell and gene. We're still at, for all intents and purposes, the beginning of something that will take decades to fulfill. So you can't look, I would argue, you can't look at a hiccup that in the grand sweep is a year or two and get too upset about what we've missed. And I think that patient capital is a really important partner in all that.
Yeah, that's actually one other thing, which I think I've said on these panels before, but I'll say it again because I just think it's worth saying because I get to work with markets all around the country. But where Philadelphia has come, despite some of the challenges, maybe not meeting some of the expectations, happening in Cambridge everywhere, where this market, this city has come in, let's call it 5 years, is remarkable. I think, 5, 6 years ago, when it was just, we were in the beginning stages and it was really starting to hit Philadelphia, people were still very skeptical.
Yep.
Today, 5 years later, I think just about any conversation you have about life sciences clusters in the United States, Philadelphia is always mentioned. And I think that gets lost a little bit in the noise that we have to deal with.
Now, I see some difference. Ian, you mentioned before that every so often there are large amounts of space that struggle to find occupants, tenants, and the like. Matt, you mentioned the interest in a couple of year cycle among investors. How do the two balance?
Yeah, well, I think that that is what the industry's always struggled with. So if you go back to the business model of the 2000s and the 2010s, you'd find that before 2017 or 18, the model was always to wait for demand to get pent up a bit and then start new campus projects. That got changed in a very unique cycle. It's the longest open window the industry's ever had. More capital came in between 2015 and 2021 in the longest bull run than any other time in the industry's history. It's never been that sustained kind of 7-year fever pitch that I would argue led us to a little bit of irrational exuberance.
Yeah.
So we got ourselves in a little bit of trouble there, got out over our skis, and the business model flipped on its head. We then got into some speculative investing that was before the demand was ready because there were so many IPOs, we've been through this before too, that we needed to basically rethink having space ready for when the startups came. That's where the model got flipped on its head. And I think what we'll end up finding is 2021 was the anomaly. We're going to end up effectively going back to the business model in all prior biotech cycles, that 2021 will end up being a blip for a lot of reasons. But the best part about that bull run isn't the blip that turned the model on its ear a little bit. It's actually that 7 years of investing in new science and expanded space and people, places, and products, has all, generally speaking, held up. So even in this headwind that we're seeing currently, we haven't seen the total industry bucket of R&D spend and the total industry bucket of R&D headcount go down. Generally speaking, they've been flat now for a little while, but the industry's not contracted. So all that investment in new science that we saw during that bull run has, generally speaking, held up. That's what I would say is the biggest fundamental to keep an eye on for reason to hold optimism. Maybe I'm looking at this with rose-colored glasses.
No. No. Just to continue with that perhaps as well, we're continuing this positive theme. You know, you mentioned the headcount staying the same. I mentioned record employment. You know, it's not a line chart that's going up like this, but technically we are at a new record of employment. The good news too is that we are coming out of the trough in terms of at least headcount, which ultimately will lead to commercial real estate demand. So if you look at United States biotechnology or employment in US biotechnology research and development companies, it was obviously on a tear, growing by about 20%. Actually, no, the figures are in 2022, the US grew about 29,000 jobs for US biotech R&D, okay? 2023, 0. Industry was flat. In the past 6 months, we've grown about 5,000 jobs. Long story short, there's some stability, or obviously stability behind the industry, but we've been through kind of that flat lining. We're coming out of that right now. So that's some extra, I guess, good news for where we stand.
How much does that lead to a good news 2025, or is that a little bit too exuberant?
Wait,
That's where.
I know a guy.
Yeah.
Now, I might have to protect his identity. Let's just say his name rhymes with Schmian Schmanderson. He's been working for a long time on a model to sort of connect when we see early stage financing tick up and what follows that in terms of the industry's growth wave. Schmian, can you tell us anything more about
Yeah, I really can.
the secret model?
Thank you for setting me up on that.
Sure.
Well, this is the other good bit of news, if you will, is that, I mean, it's intuitive. We've talked about this in some of our research, but it's becoming, it's becoming pretty clear where we're headed, I would say right now. Having said that, and if Nancy's going to put us with predictions, that is so tough with some of the things going on in the world right now, obviously. But putting some of those aside, I mean, it is clearly historically venture capital funding has led increases in headcount, increases in hiring in the life science industry, roughly 12 to 15, maybe 18 months. You can see this trend following its historic course of where it is right now, and if it continues the rate at which it's on right now, with venture capital funding slowly ticking higher, we may have 15,000 more biotech employees by the end of 2025. So as of right now, we're on the upswing. Obviously, there's people in the room, and we're in real estate. It's hard to overlook some of the oversupply. It's going to take a while to get out of that. But on the demand side, we're on the upswing, moving into and improving.
Yeah, I think, Alex, the blocking and tackling of the short-term view is that we're going to have to catch up with absorption for a little while to get our way out of this. And I think the conversations we hear from capital that's looking around the world for what will be next is already looking ahead. And so the reality is they've started to include in their basic math that the absorption cycle to catch up with this is going to work us through into the second half of 2025. Now, if that holds up and we can get through this, then we're going to be thinking about what the next wave of investments looks like, planning in 25 and looking at 26 and further. And I think if you look at where Philadelphia is as a biotech market today, that what will hold up, what will be a durable story, is that the multinationals already know about Philly, and they haven't all yet placed their bets in cell and gene. They're settling. It is settling down, but it isn't done, and it's certainly not decided. And as we see that continue to play out over time, your cost advantage as Philadelphia, you, the royal you, is a tremendous tale to tell juxtaposed with Boston. And I will give you something from the headlines. I'm not betraying any confidences here. This is a headline above the fold story, just to give you the contrast. Norgis invested in a Boston properties deal in Boston, across the river, that was published at over $2,000 a foot. Philadelphia's competitive landscape will hold up, even if that corrects a bit. And everybody looked at that deal when they made it, at the sort of joint venture rate they bought into, and thought, everyone is still going to win, including Norges, in that deal, because the nature of the long-term leases involved, the tenants that they've got, everybody's still going to win at that rate, which, if you're a multinational looking at that math, thinking about where the markets are that are candidates for you based on the existing pool of talent, what's going to shake out in the continued sort of staking of flags in cell and gene spaces, Philadelphia is going to have a great story to tell over the medium and long haul.
Yeah, we could look at it just really quickly too. If we're on this thing, where Philadelphia stands in the cycle, what's going to push it through, so on and so forth. We talked about some of the larger macro factors. If you look at our data through through mid 2024, end of June, a couple things that bounced out to me that were pretty showed Philadelphia favorably, especially if you compare it to the Boston and San Diego. It's a couple things. One is I thought it was striking that Philadelphia, we're showing life sciences leases signed, whether it's renewals or new, for the first half of 2024 was just under 800,000 square feet, okay? That's more than what they did in San Diego. And I think we're less than half as big as San Diego, technically, by the amount of inventory we track. Boston signed, and San Francisco signed about 1.3 million square feet in leases. Okay, so we've signed a little under 800,000. Boston and San Francisco signed about 1.3 million square feet. Boston's 5 times the size of Philadelphia too. So not exactly boom, but that's a good number. That's showing some good activity here comparatively. Also, if you look at the amount of people looking for space, the amount of tenants, life sciences tenants looking for space in Philadelphia, one good way to compare it versus other markets is by looking at that amount of space and dividing it by its inventory. And so about, for every 10 square feet of life sciences space in Philadelphia, there's about 1 square foot of tenants looking for it right now. That's one of the highest of all the markets in the United States. So that equates to about 10% of its base is looking for space right now. Boston's about 3% right now. So there's some challenges just like every place, but on the whole, Philadelphia is on the right side of trends.
I just realized, Ian, what we are. We're kind of yin. I'm going to be yin or yang, and you're going to be the other. I don't know which one it is. But I have even more good news.
Are you going to quibble with
I'm going to quibble again.
Okay,
I have
good.
even more good news, Alex.
Yeah.
So I would say in 2021, we were dealing with lots of large requirements from users growing into their pipelines. And I would lump a bunch of cell and gene companies into that category. What that manufacturing requirement often looks like is 100 to 250,000 square feet, highly specialized use, very expensive space, highly refined and heavily regulated. When the capital markets hit the pause button, a whole bunch of those small cap biotechs paused those projects. We're seeing some of those come back onto the drawing board. And so as much as a 50 basis point cut was great, it's just the start. We need the environment to come back that allows them to use their own capital. Here's why I would argue that's even more important in the first half of 2025. They still have extremely limited self-financing options if they're going to build their own supply chain. So they're currently dependent more on the CMO category sort of backfilling for that planning. If they're able to draw back to capital markets being open to them, having all that kind of flexibility available, we'll see a bunch of those planes land, and there are millions of square feet attached to 450 or so therapies in late-stage trials that will mean the world of difference to the whole industry. So I would still say we need another point or two to come off of the interest rate for some of that to open up, but there's $5 trillion plus sitting on the sideline waiting to move. So I think it's all going to be meaningful for us if we continue on that trend, provided there aren't any other, I don't know, black swan events, but I'm going to leave that to Yang over here. He's got the black swans on his radar.
Yeah.
So CBRE has pegged Philadelphia as a 7th largest market. Jen ranks Philadelphia as 6th this past summer. It's up from 7th, by the way. And what's keeping it from the top, and how will it ultimately at least progress, if not reach Bostonian heights?
You threw the first one at me. Well, there's a couple things right off the top because he's just going to sit there and put it in my lap first. But
here's how I was going to do that. I was ready for this one, Nancy. I was going to say,
we got 21 seconds.
Ian and I were just talking about this. Ian.
It's not getting easier for a Northeast city to compete. Okay.
Yeah.
Let alone, northern Midwest state. The southern states, I can't believe I'm talking about northern versus southern, but it is. The Texases, the Floridas, the North Carolinas are as aggressive as ever, has so much momentum towards them. They don't have the same cluster effect that Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia offers, Kendall Square offers, but it's just still going to be hard to compete. Policymakers need to be as aggressive as they've ever been to continue the momentum we have. So that's one thing they're going to have to do to keep rising to those rates.
I'm going to go off the map a little bit with a nuanced ingredient. I still have the perception, and maybe it's wrong, I stand to be corrected, and anybody here that wants to throw tomatoes at this supposition, I welcome. I still have the perception that capital formation here is less than what it should be and less than what it needs to be. Yeah. And if that's the case, you need some intervening events, and I'll give you an example. I was one of 5 or so principal co-authors of Maryland's angel investor rebate. It was not a credit, it was money back on your taxes. And so I think little levers like that you can pull to encourage new capital to come in changes it affects a delta. In other words, you can't be happy with the organic growth rate of domestic capital. You've got to intervene in a way that forms new capital that wouldn't otherwise be here. Whether that's discounting the treasury residency of big PE firms or what have you. Those levers are available. If you really want that, I'd say that's up to obviously people in different pay grades. Maybe we should visit Governor Shapiro, but they're available.
So is it a matter of incentives? Because I know earlier speaker said that, stay tuned and there's stuff in the works for this state. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. If you were going to, try and create, I think somebody mentioned the matched funding mechanism for venture. That's hugely important.
But Matt's right. The incentives are they help, certainly. But man, if we had some more of that money, serious venture capital located in Philadelphia. I mean, look at Boston and San Francisco. Just the amount of money sloshing around those two markets.
That's true.
And able to just grow companies is huge.
I would say, too, Alex, sort of related to all that, if you look at, these are outlier events. I don't want to say the mega rounds are a basis. They're not a foundation because they're true outliers. But if you look at Mark Tessier-Levine going to Zara and then getting $1 billion from Arch, I think it happened actually the other way. He was recruited by Arch to go lead Zara with $1 billion. So related events. Arch could have done that anywhere. And I think, the venture capital pool that's here, let me get wonky for just a second, will lead to endogenous growth theory. We really want to know about endogenous growth theory. It's Paul Romer at Stanford. Sorry. Apologies.
That's right.
But
no, that's
you need to grow your own local success while you attract some smokestacks from around the world. So those things have to happen simultaneously. And if you're going to actually create an inorganic increase in local growth, it would have to come from more formation. New enterprise formation, new ideation, and new capital formation.
Great. And just winding it down, because what do you see over this fall and into 2025?
Can I be in, or do you want to be in?
Yeah, I don't know. Whatever you think.
I think the amount of increase that we've seen in early stage funding is the best sign that we could hope for. Obviously, we need interest rates to come down. We need that sidelines capital to come back in. But the NewCo activity is very high, coast to coast. And that is the best sign for the industry that we haven't given up. There's a little contraction. That was a normal sort of cycle. But essentially, the industry will still be there when the environment comes back for it.
What do we expect in 2025? Well, listen, the heroic conclusion here is we've bottomed. Yeah. Almost with every indicator, think about every metric for the industry, even in commercial real estate, we've bottomed. It's all, I would say it's almost all upside from here. Having said that, vacancy, there's going to be probably more vacant space at the end of 2025. And that's going to be the only thing facing this market. And probably, it's going to be hard to see a lot of the silver linings when you have that kind of overhang, this oversupply we're still going to have to deal with. So, but on everything else is bottomed. Employment, demand, funding,
Risk capital.
We'll have to see where rents exactly go.
Yep.
They don't fluctuate a whole lot, but we do know that vacancy, there's going to be more vacancy by the end of 2025 than there is now.
I know this isn't Philadelphia, but if you didn't watch, this was last Halloween, so it's almost been 12 months. If you didn't watch the CRISPR hearing on their successful application, it's basically an all-day hearing on Halloween last year, obviously very memorable because of the day. But the first half of the hearing was reviewing the data. And when the FDA proponent reviewer asked the sponsor, what kind of side effects did you see? The CRISPR guy says, we didn't have any. And the FDA reviewer said, what about on a second dose? And he said, we've never had to give one. This was a cure. So I think we're just at the beginning. Obviously, that's not a Philadelphia story, CRISPR, not here. CRISPR refined a number of things we were working on in cell and gene for the whole industry. But I think this is still just the very beginning. And that's why Philadelphia's tale is yet to be written, really, for the fulfillment of the cell and gene promise. But it's so exciting, it will change everything.
And we'll wait and see how that story gets written over the next few months and into 2025. So our time is up, unfortunately. But Matt, Ian, thank you for spending the last half hour and sharing your thoughts with our folks here.
Thanks,
and
Alex.
Take care.
Thanks, Alex.